So welcome to Exceptional TV. My name is Kerestell Smith, and today we're going to delve into some of the fascinating aspects of virtual reality. And to help us do that, we have two remarkable individuals with us. Joe Millward, who leads a team to research the latest digital technologies from social media to mobile development and the rise of AI, especially with a focus on how this enhances education and training for TAFE New South Wales in Australia, and he'll go into the details of that. And our other guest is Kerestell Smith, perhaps better known by many as LemmingVR, and the solo dev of the now one-year-old VR game, Gorilla Tag. Welcome to both of you.
Thanks, Karen.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So I'm going to start by asking Joe to tell us a little bit about how you got into VR and about where you are and what you are doing.
Yeah, sure. I've got a pretty interesting background. I've been dabbling with technology since I was quite young. I tried virtual reality for the first time in 1996. It was terrible, but it was amazing at the same time. So the technology I could see it was what was possible, but back then obviously the technology was so early, and I was always fascinated with things like visual effects and animation. I studied as a 2D and a 3D animator in my background, and then once I started to see augmented reality on the mobile device coming, sort of the 2009 period, and then by about 2012, I started realizing that these things were gaining speed, and then obviously with Oculus releasing the DK1, I was working with a bunch of my animation friends who were exploring that space, and that's where I started. And then most recently, before the role here, I was working at 3M, and that was when I really started officially working to do virtual reality for organizations and understanding how to implement it into large organizations and training centers.
So what you're saying then is that when it began, it was really pretty bad. But part of what drove you was what you could see in it as its potential.
Definitely, yeah. It's one of those things where, and I think it's been so part of science fiction, both augmented and virtual reality, for so long that we're all hoping that we're going to get to that utopian environment where we'll have these really lightweight devices that allow us to jump into a virtual space or jump into an augmented space. And we're getting close. I mean, I think we're definitely on the path, and it's really exciting, and people are starting to work out how these technologies are going to be used, and what are the social norms of these technologies and all those type of different areas. So that's where I think that's really exciting at the moment. And training for us, we see as it's going to fundamentally change how we deliver training moving forward. We're engaging students in areas where they want to engage. I mean, gaming is so enormous now, and most students playing some type of games is on the PC, on consoles or mobile, and that's how they want to consume content, and that's how they understand things in a 3D environment. And I think that's where we're moving towards.
And I was lucky enough to be able to attend a couple of the the Oculus Connect back as far as I think it was 2017, 2018. And I remember going and sitting around, and people would bring up their augmented reality glasses, and something would fly by, and it was like, yeah, but how useful is that? I heard a lot of the interest and the intense interest by so many about VR. But then the next year and the next year and the next year, it seemed like it didn't come to fruition. It didn't become useful as quickly as some people thought. What are some of the challenges, do you think, AR and VR are really facing? And I'm going to ask Kerestell, I'm going to ask you some of these questions too. And so this can be jump in and both of you respond to these.
Sure. Yeah, can I go first, Kerestell?
Yeah, so I think that kind of it's a good point about thinking about potential, and so much of kind of what's happening in VR, and I think especially AR, is people who are really excited about, oh, what are the possibilities? How could things be? Like really excited about the future, all this stuff. But the problem with that kind of thinking is that it is not focused on what the technology actually is. It's really easy to think about, oh, wouldn't it be cool if X or Y or Z? But once you're kind of facing the reality of the technology, like it's more important to kind of look at it and be like, okay, what does this actually enable? What does this actually do? Not what I hope it could do or wish it could do or think maybe it'll happen in the future. What is it actually doing right now? And I think that that's really a very important thing to think about it, because it can already do a lot. Like the technology is really fantastic and it's doing all sorts of new things. But I think people are getting caught up in some of the hype a little bit and not thinking more about like, okay, what are the actual things that it can do? So video gaming is a really great example of something where, yeah, VR games exist today and you can go out and play them. So that's a huge, point in VR's favor. And I think that's something that AR specifically struggles with a little bit, is that it's still very in a like, oh, if with the technology's a little better, maybe we could do this, maybe we could do that. But even if the technology improves, what are the actual use cases? That is something that I think is a little bit less clear. But that's part of the reason why I'm so excited about VR, is that, I think that these headsets are already fantastic. The way that you can interact with people is second only to interacting with them in real life. If you are on a video chat with somebody, kind of like we are right now, one of the biggest problems is even something as simple as eye contact, right? It's a very disengaging experience to see someone's face and see their eyes not looking at you. It feels like it feels almost worse than not seeing them, because you're getting these social cues that, oh, this person isn't paying attention to me because they're not looking at me in the eyes. But with something like VR, that's not a problem. You can look directly at people, and even if they're cartoony or low res or whatever, you still get that connection. So I think that VR is really exciting, because if you kind of think deeply about what the technology is actually capable of and what it's doing today, it's already really great. So, yeah.
And what it's doing today, I think, is what part of what you're doing, Joe, in terms of using it for training, using it in what. Can you explain a little bit about how you are using it today and why you see it as innovative for your students and others?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the big thing for us is we're really cognizant of making sure we're using the technology for authentic reasons. So there is a tendency for people to be enamored by this technology. I mean, I've been surrounded by this, for over 20 years. So I sort of, it's not news to us. We see it as a tool. And the most important thing I want to try and identify is, where are those really wicked problems that we need to solve that can't be done with any other technology? One of the key areas we're looking at the moment is simulating dangerous scenarios. So one of our applications we've just completed is people climbing ladders and understanding how to safely climb ladders, but they can fall off and hurt themselves, or they can see one of their colleagues fall and hurt themselves. And that's something you don't want to replicate in real life, obviously. So we're able to do that. So the students are able to get that feeling, and we've had a fantastic feedback where we've seen these students actually fall off the ladder in virtual reality and say, oh, that's not real, I understand the consequences of that. And you can see on the video, so they're about to fall. So and that for me is pretty profound, to have a student be excited about safety training. Another one is getting access to equipment, like you saw there was a medical device that we worked with a company called Worth, and that's a fairly expensive medical device, and for it to be used in training mode, it needs to be taken off the hospital floor and put into a mode where it can't be used for testing blood, doing blood analysis. So and then you've got limited numbers of these units and lots of nurses that need to be certified, so we're able to virtualize that experience and allow them to train whenever they need to jump into a headset. And also with the Quest 2, it's been really pretty compelling, because it's about as complex as an iPad, and we can just have them, sitting there and ready to use when people need to jump in. And they can self sort of learn, and it's not too difficult for them to get their heads around it. And to Kirstell's point as well is there is huge potential, and I think technology takes a long time. It goes really slow and then really fast. So I think we're at a point now where it's still taking a long time because we're iteratively improving, and then suddenly we'll have this acceleration forward where we won't be using phones anymore. We'll have, heads-up displays, augmented glasses or whatever. But, we don't need to live in that moment yet because that's not here yet. So to Kirsty's point, I totally agree. We've got a huge opportunity with the technology we have now. Like I've seen, people have tears in their eyes in these experiences just because they are so compelling and so profound. And that's really exciting to me. And also, as I said before, using the mediums that students are already doing in their social time to train is super compelling. And then also getting them to understand those social cues that we discussed before is a lot of times, especially kids today sometimes struggle with social, actually socializing, but they do that in games naturally. So I think if we can extend that into virtual reality and even with our training, having social aspects to that too is really compelling.
The social aspects, I think this brings me to one question that I have about Guerrilla Tag. We haven't even really talked about your game, Kerestell, but one of the big things about that is that it's a social game for simians, and humans are simians in our own ways. But beyond that, there are a lot of issues that come around, the sheer force of the presence that people have, which is the strength of VR. But looking at the darker side of it, the challenges for inappropriate behavior. Can you tell us a little bit? I guess first of all, you have to introduce us a little bit to the game, and so maybe we can just start there, and we can show a little clip of your video, and you're still there, and you can keep talking.
Yeah, so it's that's a really important aspect, like the two sides of the same coin, right? Like if we're saying that the potential of VR includes the fact that it feels much more real and present than other things, is that at the same time, that can be a good thing and that can be a bad thing as well. If someone's being a creep or someone's being racist or if anything like that, those feelings are kind of amplified because it feels a lot more like it's something that's actually happening to you, right? And I think in an important way, it is actually happening. I think the dividing line between what's just online or on the computer or whatever in real life is actually pretty thin. So yeah, that's something that is a big struggle. And I think that's something that I think the way that it's trying to be handled generally is not really being done the right way. And I don't think it's even being done the right way yet in Guerrilla Tag. I think a big part of the problem is that it is still in most games and virtual environments, it's actually pretty hard to meet up with the kind of people that you want to, right? Like if you're meeting up with somebody in real life, you have a ton of social cues, how people look, how they're dressed, how they're kind of presenting themselves, how they interact with other people. And that gives you a really strong sense of like, hey, maybe this is someone I want to talk to, maybe this is somebody I want to avoid. But in VR, or in games generally, you don't have that as much. So I'm not really on the side of people who think that the solution to this kind of problem is to like really sanitize the VR interactions. I think that a lot of people are thinking about things are like, okay, you'll just make it proactively disable anybody being able to get close to you or being able to talk to you or, immediately being able to just jump or quit out of the game or whatever. I think that the way forward is going to be more along the lines of like giving people the ability to find the people that they want to interact with and proactively choose to interact with those people instead of just meeting up with people randomly and then trying to get rid of the people who are causing problems. Because part of the reality of the issue is that, I think a little bit of the implicit argument about that is that, this is a huge problem in VR and, games and all this other stuff. But the reality is that that's a big problem with any time people interact with each other at all, right? So you're never going to completely get rid of the negative side of interacting with other people. As long as there are people involved, you're going to have those negative interactions. And I think that the important part is going to be more giving people the ability to congregate in the groups that they want to. And then, on top of that, obviously, you've got to ban all the people who are being racist or creeps or whatever. I think that's obviously very important. But I think that that is not the fundamental solution, because there's always going to be more people like that, right? You can't ban them all. Like if you ban a thousand, another thousand will show up and you'll have the same problem. You have to kind of address the root cause of how those negative interactions happen. And I think a big part of it is just people who don't want to interact with each other in the first place are interacting with each other. If I want to hang out with people and I choose to go to a bar, I'm going to have a very different experience than if I choose to hang out with people by going to, a sporting event or a video game conference or go to the park. But in video games and VR, everybody's just kind of mashed together, and you can be reactive and try and respond to what happens after people have already met up, or you can kind of try and be proactive, I think. And I think those more proactive solutions are things that haven't been dealt with very well. And I think it's probably going to be the more important aspect of tackling some of these problems.
And as a developer, how are you? I can see that you've been observing this pattern of behavior and then looking for solutions. So, as you've begun to see that conceptually, are you finding that easy to do or challenging to do in the setup of the game, in the coding, in the structure?
I think the hardest part in that regard is like the design, in the sense of like how should that, like, it's very nice to say, oh yeah, I just want to make it so people who want to hang out with each other can. Well, how do you actually do that? That is the harder question, or the harder problem to answer, I think, is that like how do you actually make that happen? Like if this was in real life, if I'm an adult, I probably don't want to play a game with a 14-year-old, and I can tell they're 14 by looking at them. So I'm not going to go over to the 14-year-old and be like, hey, do you want to hang out? But in VR, and in games generally, you don't really have that ability as much. People can lie about their age. People can just kind of like not just be quiet and not even talk. So how you don't have any information. So I think that is something that is going to come down to just kind of like practical solutions. Like one case is that I have, in a specific issue I have, is say I have players who want to play the game more competitively. Like they want to play specifically with other people who are also really good at the game. How do you make sure that only the people who want to interact with each other can? So one solution that I've theorized that I haven't been able to implement yet is, maybe I make a small obstacle course before you can join the competitive game. It's something that tests your skills a little bit. So you need to have some level of competence in order to play that at all. So now, instead of it just being, oh, do I want to play competitive or do I want to play casual, and which allows people who probably aren't appropriate for that competitive environment, might just choose it because they feel like it, or they might just choose it randomly, or maybe they're borrowing someone else's account, or who knows. We'll just jump in and be able to play, and that causes that friction. Add a little bit of a gate that says, okay, test your skills a little bit. If you have these, more advanced movement skills, you can play in the competitive mode, and that'll filter out a bunch of people who are just going to cause that friction. I'm also imagining other things like, the environment that you're in might be different, right? Like certain kinds of people might be drawn to different areas because, like, maybe if you have one area that's really wide open and has a lot of cool stuff in it, maybe the people who are trying to explore and test out new environments will be more drawn there. Whereas maybe if you have a smaller environment that doesn't allow you to play that aggressively, maybe that's where people will go more to just hang out and be chill. So maybe that's about kind of in managing the environment. Um, I talked to one, I think he actually recently got his PhD. Let me his name was Divine Maloney. I talked to him a little while ago, and one of his thoughts was that, maybe you design things more in the manner of like a theme park or something like what Disney does, right? They have very good management of like spaces and places and, drawing certain kinds of people to certain areas. And maybe that's something that there are lessons that you can learn there. So I think that this is one of those things that you can say a lot of nice ideas, but I think the struggle is in the practical solutions to these problems. And I don't think that much work has been done practically. And I think that's going to be the challenge, is that, just figure out what works, what doesn't, what things make sense and what don't. So yeah,
I also think the maturation of virtual reality will solve a lot of that. I mean, my team has been together for about 4 years, and so we do socialise in VR. Every Friday is we actually do stand up in virtual reality, and then every Friday afternoon we do interface testing, which is jumping into a multiplayer game together and understanding how the mechanics work and things like that. So we've got a community that we've already established. So I've got 11 guys that I can get together with, and that means we automatically have the environment that we want, and that's something the Kerestell's point is, like at the moment those mechanics aren't there naturally for most people. Because VR is usually something where they've bought a headset and they've got no other friends that have a headset, so they've got to go and find people that have a headset. I think as we start to move into this being adopted more widely, it's going to be, Meta's going to obviously use the power of their social networks to be able to say all your friends you can hang out with are already there because they're your Facebook friends, for example, or your contacts on Instagram. So you already have an affinity with that. And then I also think, definitely, that's like it's great to hang out with new people that have similar, ways of thinking or hobbies or views of the world, and that can be tailored to environments that appeal to that type of person. I think there's definitely different ways of going, but I think we're still at the very early stage of early adopters. I mean, we're talking probably 2014 when it was a wild west, when there was literally only hardcore tech nerds like myself that were in there. But we're starting to get to the point where I think, for Christmas, 6 of my friends got Quests, and they're not technical at all. They just got them because they're sick of this pandemic and they needed something to do. So I think that's where, and the fact that the Quest outsold the Xbox last year is testament to that. We're seeing that hockey stick adoption starting to happen.
Yeah, you made a good point, Joe, or at least it made sense to me, is kind of utilizing the existing networks of people, which I know already happens with Discord or with Facebook or with Instagram or whatever, is that allows that reach around the otherwise hard to find your way through space in VR. So by having the mechanisms within VR to get together with chosen friends, but you have those other communities that exist perhaps outside of the VR through your list of friends and whatever. It is a kind of reach around, yeah.
And I think also the topics things like Altspace and other social platforms. There's a really strong network there called the Educators in VR, and you can have people, anyone can drop into that environment, but it's teachers talking about educational problems. So if a 14-year-old or just a gamer jumps in, they're going to get bored really quickly and go, this isn't my environment anyway. So I think a lot of that stuff is self-filtering. Definitely the abusive stuff is an interesting challenge, and I know that Meta's looking at it, and I know obviously developers have to consider it quite closely, and so do we. But I also think that because the virtual reality is so close to reality, right. we have standard norms anyway. Like, you wouldn't do something to someone on the street. And as we get closer, like as avatars move to being hyper realistic, and that's where we're moving towards, you'll have options to choose what you look like. But especially if you're doing things where you are embodying your true self, in inverted commas, that's going to definitely trigger norms as well. So if we were to catch up as ourselves in a virtual environment, we'd still behave the way we would anyway. So you're always going to get bad actors, but they're going to be bad actors in whatever setting. As before, if you go to a bar, you're always going to make a jerk at the bar anyway. You're just going to avoid that person. So that's probably.
And speaking as a female and an older female, going into the VR world can be quite challenging, because either people don't believe that you really are female, or they don't really believe you are not pretending to be something that you're not. And anyway, it's still some work to be done in that area. Let's put it this way.
There's also other interesting aspects, though, of how people want to represent themselves is totally up to them as well. So that's the other thing.
Right.
There's a lady in I think it's Nairobi, and she actually interacts with people in business as a white American male, and
Right.
she does that because she gets the respect that she wouldn't normally get in business settings, and that for me is a huge opportunity for disenfranchised folks or for marginalised people to be able to sort of empower themselves to embody an avatar that may be more socially acceptable in certain settings. The fact that that is required is quite sad, but this is we live in the real world,
Right.
and we can't change huge social problems with a click of a button. But I think the fact that these folks can actually represent themselves in multiple ways is interesting. And then also people that may have, you've got obviously gender fluid people who may not necessarily identify how they are seen in the real world. They've got that opportunity to identify and create their true self in a virtual environment.
Yeah, and to be frank, many times when I'm in that space, I like to let them know that I am older, primarily because I want to break their concept a little bit that the only people who come into these games are 14-year-olds or 20-year-olds or 30-year-olds, but actually it's a space for older folks as well. Actually, I think it's going to be very important potentially for aging. Is that an area for elder entertainment, education, engagement that is being explored in your area, Joe?
Yeah, there's definitely, I know there's a number of institutes that are looking into that space, and aged care is a huge area for us too, so from a training perspective. Most of our stuff is from the carers perspective, but I know there's a lot of, a number of organisations that are doing, especially with patients with dementia and Alzheimer's and others, because it actually activates different areas of the brain that they aren't usually actively using. I've seen some amazing stuff where they had some ladies who originally were from Greece, and they couldn't travel anymore. They were in their 80s and 90s, but they put them into Google Earth, and they were able to go and visit the village that they grew up in. Things like that are amazingly compelling, and they're the things where I think, especially for memory, because a lot of times Alzheimer's, short-term memory is usually the person that goes with that as well as dementia. But if you've got the ability to sort of pass them back into other environments, back in time, they it's a calming effect. There's a bunch of areas where they can tackle those various things, and also things like meditation and mindfulness are areas where I see that being a huge benefit as well. So, but for mine, both my parents, really enjoy the technology, and they see the benefit, and there definitely there's considerations around balance for older folks in particular, and things like that you've got to take into account. But we try and make sure that the experiences that we develop are fairly grounded and stable, because they have to be, because we're delivering out to such a large cohort of people who've got to consider that. It's also another area is accessibility. So we're looking at obviously how do people in a wheelchair use these technologies. If they've got a controller and then they've got to control their chair, there's considerations around that. We're building a subtitle system at the moment for virtual reality, which is really compelling too. And that for me, those types of areas are really exciting. We've actually got one of our colleagues at TAFE who she's looking after our disabilities and inclusion program, and she's actually 100% blind, but she wants to get into virtual reality. So we're working out how she can do that. So we're building she uses a mobile phone application called Seeing AI, which is a Microsoft application, to see the world at the moment. So she can hold something up and it'll tell her what she sees using computer vision. We're going to replicate that to her in a virtual environment. So she'll be able to take that phone into the VR space and then be able to hold up and see what she's doing. And also things like spatial audio are really important for that as well. People may not be able to see as well. They're still getting that spatial environment.
You just mentioned something before about taking, a walk back in time. I just wanted to take Kerestell for a quick walk back in time if I can get this to play. Let's see if it's not it. Let me see if I can do that. Well, I'm gonna throw this back to you for a minute, Kerestell, while I go and play with this setting. But it's about something that you did for your, what was it? Your project in your final year of university.
Yeah, there's a mechanical engineering major, so the projects were, try to do your final senior year project. So that year I was trying to work on basically a puppeted robot hand. And, my thought was that the interaction between sorry, I haven't thought about this for a while. So
yeah, I just have to get it to play. For some reason, it just didn't want to play.
Yeah, so the motivation behind it is that I think that as people, we're kind of limited in a lot of ways by, our real life circumstances, right? But I think that what is interesting about technology is that the world that we kind of exist in is just one possibility, right? Like the virtual worlds, especially, it's really easy to change the rules and create new environments and ways of interacting with things. So kind of that was my, hey, I'm just going to make a little robot hand that you can move your real life hand and then it would move. So I think that kind of like there are a lot of similar thoughts I have about VR and stuff today. And one of the biggest ones is just that I think it's really interesting that there is kind of like this popular sense of the real world versus the virtual world, right? So what does real mean in that sense? People generally use it to refer to as like the physical world that you can see and touch and stuff. But kind of like the implicit thing they're denigrating is the idea of, virtual worlds or virtual interactions or interactions over the computer and stuff not being real or legitimate. But I think what's really interesting about VR is that it's kind of proving that that's not true. Your brain doesn't really have I'm looking at real life circuit in it. It just has its way of interfacing with reality. And it doesn't really care necessarily what form that takes as long as it kind of works. One of the most interesting experiences I've had with VR so far is that when I was playing, this was a few years ago now, but I was playing a bunch of Echo Arena during the beta. And so you can see I'm kind of messing around with the virtual.
Sorry, I was bringing it up because I wanted to see the connection between what you were thinking then and what you're doing now, and you brought that in anyway. So
yeah. So one of the most interesting interactions I had is that I was playing a bunch of Echo Arena, and everybody in this game is these little robot bodies and stuff. But the important aspect is they're kind of short. They're like 5'6", 5'8". And one of the people that I was interacting with was one of the developers, and his name is Dave Newbelt, and he's really tall, like 6'6", 6'8". I don't know. He's giant. But what was interesting is that I had played with him a bunch in the game, and I got this sense of, hey, I talk to this guy all the time, blah, blah, blah. So when I went to meet him in real life, I had this moment of like, oh my God, you're so tall. Like, and I felt a little stupid because I've seen tall people before. Like, I'm not amazed that I've seen someone who's tall. But kind of what I realized is that I had a similar experience I had to when you see a kid who's grown up since you've last seen them, right? Like if you see a small child and then a few years later, they're like twice their size, you go, oh my God, you've grown so much. And I always thought that was dumb when I was younger because it was like, yeah, of course I've grown. Like you haven't seen me for years. What did you think? How do you think this works? But what I've realized is that feeling is there's a cognitive dissonance between the mental image you have of a person and what you're actually seeing. So if you've been around somebody for a while and they're a certain height and they have certain features, and then you see them again and they're completely different, your brain like hitches. It's like, this isn't right. So that's where that feeling comes from. You're like, oh my God, you've grown so much. And that's because your brain is like surprised at the real life person compared to your mental image of them. So I realized that when I saw him, like I was so used to talking with him in the virtual world that I had a mental map of who he was. And when he was really tall, I had the exact same feeling, like, this is not who I expected this person to be. Now, I wasn't surprised that he didn't look like a robot, because I knew he wouldn't look like a robot, but my brain was certain that he was shorter. So to me, that speaks really strongly of the fact that the virtual world is not, it is different than the real world, but it's not inherently like inferior or superior. It's just kind of a different way of being, and your brain doesn't really care about the difference. Like if the interactions you have and the experiences you have, those are real interactions and experiences. And what's special about VR is that it allows you to have much stronger ones that are much more fleshed out and rich, like real life is. Like, I think that's the thing about most like video games and stuff just on your little computer screen is you're missing a lot of aspects that real life does have. And when VR does have those aspects, feeling like you're interacting with somebody, being able to talk with them enough that you feel like you get to know them, all the cues of your hands moving around and your head moving around, when all those things come together, then the experience is it can be just as powerful as ones you have in real life. So yeah, that's kind of like, I think it'll be interesting as things continue to go into the future. I think that the dividing line between real life and virtual life is already really thin, and I think it's just going to get thinner.
Great.
It's both exciting and terrifying, but I'm on the whole optimistic that it'll be a net positive.
Yeah, I mean, those moments of presence has happened to me probably. It's probably only like a dozen times of really having those moments of feeling like you're actually inside the environment. I mean, I remember playing Alex the first time and having the moment in that clip with Jeff, one of the monsters in there, which is absolutely terrifying. But it was just that moment where I felt like my palms were sweating, and I was definitely in that world. And I think I've played that. The longest stint was about 4 hours straight of playing that game. And that provides that a moment of anxiety and all those other things that you want that game is designed to do. We had another interesting one where we use Horizon workrooms to meet up on Fridays with the team, and my production manager was sitting next to me in the virtual world, and yet he's about 400 kilometers away from me in the real world. But he went to reach, like he moved his hand, and it touched my virtual hand, but he touched his mouth at the same time. Was my in the virtual world was quite. That's a really interesting moment that he had as like, oh wow, I've actually touched across the virtual realm, I guess is what happens, and that's going to increase because fidelity and other things will add to that. I mean, even with Horizons has done such a great job of with their avatar system of bringing small nuances of expression and the way people move, they're getting better. I've even seen the IK on their elbows and stuff are almost perfect now. So you're getting these gestures, and a lot of people talk with their hands, and having that is pretty amazing. And I think that's also a big benefit from an education perspective is, I've lectured at numerous universities, and half the time the students are on their phones or they're distracted by something else. But with virtual reality, you've got their attention 100%. So it's really compelling to be able to have them sort of completely absorbed in the moment, and especially for a lot of people, because it is still new and it is still shiny, you take advantage of that. You take advantage of that time of it being magic still for a lot of people. And I mean that's going to wane pretty quickly for most. I mean, for my guys jumping into VR is I'll get back to the office, so they're jumping into work as it would be the same for most developers. So but for I still love the moment of putting a headset on somebody and then seeing their expression after they take the headset off the first time. That's always magic, and I've done thousands of demonstrations with the technology now, and it still gets me most of the time when people just go wow, and then their brain explodes and they think about all of the myriad of things that they can do, and that's where we talked about earlier, where the technology is not quite there yet for us to do everything that they want to try and do, but I love hearing their ideas, and we always put them in a list, and we've got a list of stuff that's not quite ready yet, but we're definitely going to work on them. So that's an exciting area.
I know, going back to your work, Kerestell, as a solo dev, I know that everybody's exploding brains with all those ideas that you should be doing for your game are a bit of a pain at times. But that's part of the challenge, I guess, for you as an individual, is to deal with all of these exploding brains. But one thing you said, Joe, made me remember that your TAFE, your innovation lab, now has some special relationship with Meta or the educational components. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so we've been working with Meta for a number of years because they recognised. So TAFE TAFE New South Wales has 450,000 students and 135 campuses. So we're the largest vocational training institute in the Southern Hemisphere, and that alone is compelling, obviously, to someone like Meta. But then also the fact that our lab is a full development studio. So I have 11 developers in my team, and we've built over 20 applications in the last 4 years. So they saw the work that we've done previously, and they approached us about developing some applications this year. So we'll have a bunch of apps that will be available for free on the public app store in the coming months, which is really exciting. And they centre around various topics, plumbing and construction and childcare and canine anatomy. So there's different areas, and they're tasters of trainings, vignettes we call them. So they're only small experiences, about 5 minutes. So we're really excited to be working with Meta on those. And then they've also, we're deploying 1,000 headsets into the school this year to understand how we start to scale this technology into the organisation. I want to understand what it's like for a student to have a headset every single day of their course, and how do we keep them engaged? Do we offer them, a chance to jump into Gorilla Tag? Do we offer them, there's all of these, because that's the other part for me, is these technologies can't be viewed just as training tools, and they need to be used as a full gamut. They're used as social tools, they're used as exploration tools. So we want to try and ensure that the students have the opportunity to do that. And then also teachers as well. We're very our eventual goal for this technology is to have non-technical authoring for teachers. They don't need to be a developer, they don't need to be a coder or a 3D animator. They can jump in, create a class, create a lesson, and do that inside the headset with very little training and not having much technical requirement. But build something compelling, build something authentic, and that's where we see we'll get to. It'll still take a couple of years just to get there, but that is build their own environment.
Fantastic. You froze a tiny little bit across the Mars. I mean, but given that you're in Sydney and we're in, California and the East Coast of America, we've been doing pretty well across the, 12,000 miles difference or whatever. But yeah, so as you and your teams do develop your work, what do you see some of the biggest challenges ahead?
Probably the first one is how to authentically embed this into curriculum and make those connections. There's definitely, we can do it. It needs rethinking from other teams as well to understand how the applications are put together, what they're focused on, because we can't teach everything in VR. That's something we never try and do. At the moment, most of the applications are more an addendum to existing content, existing curriculum, but we want to move to a place where these will be accessible environments. So you'll do your pre-learning, and the Working at Heights application that we just developed had 2.5 hours of online pre-learning, and then they were tested in the environment in the simulation. And we see that eventually being a fully certified environment where, if a student doesn't have access to a particular piece of equipment or a scaffold or something that they need to use in an assessment, or even a cadaver or whatever for nursing students, they can have that simulated environment and it's still classed as practical training, and that's where we're trying to get to. It's going to take time, and it's definitely, we've got to go through our regulatory bodies to get them to identify virtual reality as being as powerful as practical scenarios. Some things we still will have to have hands-on with practical things, but there's definitely areas where we can start to prove competency for people in that environment. But again, we talked about that earlier. The technology is, it's still early, but we definitely see. I mean, even when we had people climbing the ladders, when they went on to, we've got sort of training rigs that have sort of set up for people to climb real ladders. After they'd gone through VR, they were still much more mindful of the safety precautions that they needed to take because they'd fallen off a ladder in virtual reality. So they were aware of the potential hazards and the potential for being hurting themselves. So they were a lot more conscious of making sure that things are tied on and they were doing the steps. And because they'd gone through that process, they'd already done it as far as they were aware. Like they felt like they'd already been and done that. So that was for me, really sort of a moment where it started to understand the power of this technology, and that we were doing the authentic development of content that we were trying to achieve.
I mean, I've heard that there have been test cases done even for training doctors in certain procedures, and by going into VR, they learn the whole process much quicker and faster than somebody else. But there's got to be more and more. I'm sure that the research on this, the peer-reviewed research, will take a little bit of time. Kerestell, in terms of as a single, as a solo dev in your area of gaming, what are the biggest challenges that you face? There's probably the challenges in VR, and then there's the challenges of the gaming community, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, so I would say that like in VR, one of the biggest challenges generally facing like video game developers, maybe, or even I imagine, people trying to use VR as a whole is, I think there is a problem with kind of getting people to justify putting on the headset. Like the fundamental issue is that there's still pretty big hurdles associated with actually using the technology. And at the end of the day, people are the ones who are going to determine whether or not you use something, right? Like you can make as many things as you want. You can spend as much money and time on them as you want. But at the end of the day, if someone doesn't feel like it, they're not going to do it, So especially for video games, you're not competing with other VR games and software. You're competing with someone just looking at their phone on the couch or watching TV or sitting at their computer and playing regular games, right? So the challenge you have is not how do I make something that's as good as or better than my main competitors for playing these other VR games. It's how do I get someone to actually like put on the headset and do something, because there are all sorts of things that there are so many challenges associated with VR, and they kind of like go down the list. Like obviously the biggest one is putting something on your head. Not everybody wants to put something on their head. Right. It's kind of a pain. You got to adjust the straps and do whatever. But another thing is even stuff like, if you are playing a game on your computer or even just doing something random and like, you're loading up a web page and it takes a few seconds to load, you can alt tab to something else or close that website and open up something else. But if you're in VR and you're trying to load something up and the loading screen appears and you've got this thing on your head, you can't do anything else. If it takes 10 seconds to load, then maybe you put up with it that time, but then you think the next time, hey, do I want to play VR? And you just kind of think, well, it'll take me a while to load up the game, and then I have to wait for the game to load, and if it crashes, then I have to turn it on again. Like all these things kind of build up into just being like, do I really want to play this game that badly? Maybe I don't. I'll just sit on the TV or whatever. So I think that the solution to that is to be very aware of kind of the entire experience of using it. But I think more importantly is to really create something that makes people want to be there. Like I don't like to think of it as how do I make it so somebody wants to play Gorilla Tag or whatever. The way I think about it is how do I make someone want to kind of be in the Gorilla world? Like not, I want to play Gorilla Tag and, play a few rounds or whatever. I just want them to have the feeling of they're sitting in their house and they just would rather be in the Gorilla Tag world. You load up the game and you kind of can just walk to the city and see what other people are trying out, and maybe try some cosmetics on and see what other people are trying on. Maybe you don't feel like playing in one map, so you just run over to the next one. No loading screens, no messing around with menus or whatever. You just physically walk from place to place in the game. And it gives you this much stronger sense that you're just kind of visiting this alternative world. And I think that is something that I would say, definitely VR games, but also a lot of VR experiences just kind of in general kind of miss out on, is that I think that the way you make people want to be there is to make it a world that feels like it's not trying to kick you out. You know, it needs to have all these aspects that make it feel like you are existing in this place that you would rather be in than your house right now. And VR kind of can give you that experience in a way nothing else really can. If you are playing a regular video game, you're looking at the screen, you're not visiting this other world. But I think that a lot of people build VR things kind of the way they've built previous games and experiences and stuff, and they don't think of it in that way, and they just kind of say, hey, we have these VR tools, how do we kind of use these tools for our goal? And they think of it very mechanically, like, okay, we'll have if I want to make a VR FPS, then okay, all FPSs, you have your main screen, okay, and then you have your main menu, and then you might have an options menu, or you press the new game or whatever, and it's all extremely video gamey. Like, there's no real thought to how it should feel very different to be somewhere than it is to play a video game. And I mean, really, the reason why I think this is such a challenge is not just because it's not necessarily because it's hard, but I think the challenge is in getting people to think of things differently. Like, it's pretty easy to kind of pick up on and do what other people have already done, but it's much more difficult to think of how things are really different in this new context, and how to make things that make sense in that new context. And I think for video game developers especially, a lot of people are at a huge disadvantage, because a lot of the lessons you learn for flat screen games don't apply to VR. And if these are hard fought lessons you've learned over a long career, it's really hard to kind of like let go of those things, because all of your experience is telling you that things work in a certain way.
My team particularly know that I hate laser pointers in virtual reality.
Absolutely.
But that's lazy. It's lazy UX, right? They're taking that old paradigm and thinking, oh, people know this way of clicking and pointing and clicking, and I'm like, yeah, they know that, and it may feel comfortable for the first part of VR, but you get past that. I mean, so we built a survey in our application, and we could have just easily done a laser pointer survey, click A, B, or C. But no, we've got a hammer, and you've got to hammer a nail into the answer. So we're using that. And I think also, you've done a great job with Gorilla Tag, where you're building things that aren't possible in any other medium. And I think that's the thing. Is, I mean, like the locomotion, like the guys love the locomotion in Gorilla Tag because it's so unique. But also the social aspect as well. I think that those marrying those things of uniqueness in the medium and then the social aspect of actually having presence and actually being in a space, I think, is the way we've got to think about these things. And yeah, I see so much stuff being dragged over from the old consoles or whatever, or mobile, and it's usually because the developers have come from that world, as you said. Like, they're taking that stuff and they know how to do that really well, not thinking about the impact on, you don't have. And I always try and say to my guys, like, if it doesn't happen in the real world, it doesn't happen in VR. So you don't get pop-ups happening in the real world, so you shouldn't have those happening in virtual reality either. And it, while they think it might be better, it's taking people out of the moment. And I think that's the thing you're trying to avoid. So the more stuff is embedded into the world. And I know, we haven't said the M word yet, but I mean, the metaverse is something that people are sort of talking about what that's going to look like, what that's going to be. And I mean, there's that opportunity to have these persistent environments, which are are worlds in their own. They've got a living thing, and they continue to, when you're not there, they continue to exist and they continue to evolve. And I think that's where I see huge opportunities, and that's going to be that stickiness that you talked about of why would I go back to this, and it becomes FOMO. It's like, oh, I haven't been back to X world or whatever it is, Guerrilla World, for a while. I want to see what's happening, and especially if things change and evolve and update, and you're not there, you're like, oh, I've got to go back. Oh wow, this has changed. And that's the opportunity, I think, that people.
Yeah, I had to go in the other day to get my first year Gorilla Tag badge.
Perfect. Exactly, and they're those things. I mean, it's definitely that. Gamers love achievements, and they love having those. We're building really interesting Easter eggs into all of our training applications, and the Easter eggs have nothing to do with the training. There's in one of our plumbing experiences, if you go to open the dishwasher, you actually snap the handle off and it turns into a fortune cookie type thing. So you actually get a little message on the back of the handle every time you go to open it up. And it's things like, you don't know your own strength, or you shouldn't touch other people's stuff. So it's got a little message for people. And so they, you'll have people going into that experience looking for those little moments. And that's really, like, that surprise, the light element, I think, is really compelling as well.
And there was actually one question that I had for you, and it's perhaps an oblique way of getting to this same point, is that one of the things about VR is that I think that it addresses some of the pre-rational aspects of who we are as human beings. And so this element of surprise it's attractive. Our fear of missing out, we don't want to. These are just, they're not always the rational parts of us, but they're part of who we are. And so I'm excited to hear that you build, the positive, the constructive, the exciting, the fun side into what you're doing. And how do you see you're doing that kind of thing, Kerestell, in your games so far? And we haven't even gone beyond your thoughts about beyond Gorilla Tag, but just even within Gorilla Tag. How do you address those issues?
Yeah, there's an interesting side of kind of some things that have happened in the community is that there's like this mythology that people have created. There's something called PBBV. It's basically just this fake ghost in the game that somebody made up, and then it kind of took on its own life. Like it just expanded, and people are going nuts trying to like figure out what it is or what it means, or are there other ghosts or whatever. And it's all obviously, it's, the game is made up, and the ghost in the game is a made up thing in the made up game, right? But what's interesting about it is that these are kind of like the innate things that people want to do. They want to tell each other stories. They want to investigate their environment. They want to find things, so that even if there's nothing there to find. But I think the reason that you get that feeling is very different from kind of non-VR things. Like I think what's interesting about that is that I think it's tapping into kind of the similar experiences people have in real life. In real life, people have their own mythologies, their own ghost stories and superstitions and all this stuff. And I think the reason why that kind of thing seems to be taking off in Gorilla Tag, specifically compared to other games, is because I really did try and build it like a consistent, self-contained world. Like the way I like to think of it is instead of it just being like a VR game, I try and think of it, okay, well, what if the rules in real life were a little different? Like, okay, so these gorillas are, they don't have legs and they're really strong, so they can get around by pushing themselves with their arms. But that's the main thing I wanted to change. I didn't want to, like you were talking about, no laser pointers or pop-up menus or whatever. There are still some in-game settings because at the end of the day, you do need that kind of thing. But the way you access it is there's a little computer and there's a little keyboard, and you have to manually tap the buttons and stuff. And you can see other people interacting with it as well. So it's a very grounded way of doing things, and it feels consistent in the world. And I think building things in that way gives it a lot of credibility and authenticity. So, you're not constantly bombarded with things that remind you that you're playing a video game. It's all, of course, an illusion that this is its own world that exists and is real. But if the game doesn't bombard you with reminders that it's just an illusion. I think it's much easier for people to buy into it. And once you've kind of bought into it, now you start getting excited about all these things. You know, people want to explore their environment. They want to understand what's going on. They want to see kind of new things that they haven't seen before. And I think the most important thing is, you know, you do want to include some rewards for that kind of behavior, I think explicitly, because it's a nice little bonus thing. And I've hidden a few things in a few different spots. But I think the more important thing is to build the world in a place where people care about that stuff. Because if you don't, you know, if you have laser pointers everywhere and fake screens and menus popping up all over the place, people just aren't going to buy in. So even if there are like Easter eggs and stuff, people aren't even going to be that interested in it. So yeah, it's a very, you know, you see all sorts of things that you would never expect, and I would never have expected a ghost story to appear. And you know, there are people who have scared themselves silly, like to the point where if they see some guy who's just using hacks appear and start flying around, they're like, oh my god, he's going to ban me, and you know, there's going to be blood all over my screen, and like someone's going to show up at my house. And it's like it seems crazy, but at the same time, like, people are that way in real life as well, you know. So in a way, I think it's interesting how realistic it is in that sense. Like you're kind of priming the parts of people's brains that are already kind of predisposed towards thinking like that. And without those artificial barriers of a fake video game, you know, trying to display it as authentically and plausibly as possible, you kind of hit those same things again. It's
I also
pretty
like that
interesting.
there's not too many rules with Gorilla Tag. Like you play tag, and that's pretty much right. And so for us, like our developers spend a lot of time trying to break it, obviously, as I've told you before. But we also try and find things like, you know, how high can I climb up this particular cliff or this tree, or can we get us all on the same branch, or things like that. So you try and do those things, and you're making your own you know, rules around the game. I think that's really compelling and exciting. I think for me, having that you know, things that don't quite make sense, and you're trying to work out why it's doing it that certain way, and I think that's quite quirky, and it's appealing to a lot of people. And then, as I said, like seeing the hardcore guys play, and we're looking at things and we don't even realize that you could do that thing. So that then motivates you to go, how did they do that? So, and I imagine you have those moments yourself where you can't believe people are able to do things in your own game. And that's, I think, when you know you've got something that's got, you know, obviously got a leg to grow and evolve. So it's really exciting.
That's also a really interesting point too, because one of the aspects that I think is very interesting that I did on purpose is that, you know, there's a very limited tutorial. The tutorial is basically just, I put you in a position where until you figure out how to move, you're trapped. So you just have to figure out how to move. And then once you can figure out how to move even just a little bit, you can eventually make your way out of this starting cave tutorial area, and then you're in the main game, you know. But there are a lot of advanced movement techniques and stuff, you know, climbing things, jumping off walls that aren't explicitly tutorialized, with the intention that people, I think, will just learn faster and better if they see other people doing it. And then their reaction is, how are you doing that? Show me how you did that. And then because the way the game works is free form and fluid enough that everybody's not trying to win all the time, you have people taking the time out and say, here's how you can pinch climb, you know, here's how you can do some wall climbing stuff. So you get that social spreading of that information and knowledge and skill, which it comes across in a very different way than just having a tutorial say, hey, you know, try and do X, Y, and Z, and then you're allowed to go to the next thing or whatever. So aspects of that were definitely on purpose, where I wanted people to kind of share it with each other. And, you know, even it's funny because I don't even tell anybody the rules. Like there's nothing even in the game that says, here's how you play Gorilla Tag. Like you just either learn it on your own or other people tell you what's going on. And I think that's an aspect that is like, I don't know. I think that's pretty cool and special. And it makes me, kind of frustrated when I play other games and the tutorial lasts 45 minutes and I'm just trying to mash the skip button as fast as I can because I just want to get to the game.
And also, I think because it's difficult too, like it's an achievement to actually get those things. I remember when we first started playing, and we're like, "This is too hard. Like, we're not going to be able to do this." And then, within an hour, you're bouncing off trees and doing all the multiple things you can do. I think that's also where you haven't told us how to do it, so you get that sense of discovery and achievement. But then also, it isn't easy. Like, you didn't make it super simple. Like, it wasn't like you had an easy mode to ease you in. It's like that, straight dive in, and if you can't work it out, then you miss out. And it should be like that. Like, that's where people will I think persist with the game because they are getting some expertise almost straight away, which is really cool.
Yeah. It's, I really think that kind of that self-directed sense of exploration and discovery, and even just figuring out, how to take your first steps and things, the feeling you get from succeeding in that context is completely different from one where you're explicitly told step by step exactly how to do things. And, because the game is so low stakes, you have plenty of time to experience it and figure it out on your own. And you're not like punished. The game isn't saying like, come on, hurry up. What's taking you so long?
I still remember getting to the top of the tree, that time. It was, and how good that felt, especially when I went up the edges and around had to go up and then backwards to go on top.
Yeah.
It was,
But even that, for us, I'm thinking, for education, we haven't done that free-form opportunity yet. And I think that's definitely for us to put a student in a scenario and say, you work out what you need to do. Because a lot of the times it is very process and structured because it's a way of doing something that's actually recognised by an industry or something. But I think there's definitely opportunity, and especially for K-12 in particular, like younger students, for them to have that playground. And things like Tilt Brush and others are fantastic for that because it is that free-form ability just to go crazy and do things. And I think there isn't enough of those games. I think that's obviously why Gorilla Tag's been so successful, and others are as well. And they've got that replayability. I mean, people are still playing Tilt Brush, and it's 2014, like it's been around forever. And now it's open source, so it's getting added extra things. So I think that there's that unguided exploration, I think, is really quite powerful.
I'm thinking that we'll just continue for a couple more minutes, but one of the questions that I had for you, Joe, and then Kerestell, is in terms of people who are, they're either younger or they're considering a switch into VR. Do you have any advice, suggestions? I don't mean to give people guidelines and tutorials, but how, any suggestions?
Yeah. The first thing first would be to invest in a headset. Like, that's probably the number one. And it sounds funny because people go, of course I do, but a lot of people don't. A lot of people try and go and like study VR in some course or something, and I'm like, spend a lot of time in the headset. See if you actually want to be in this space and do that. I mean, definitely, if they want to be developers, obviously Unity or Unreal are fantastic places to start. And there's a myriad of places, including TAFE in Australia, where you can study. But I mean, there's YouTube tutorials to get you started. There's Blender's a great thing for 3D as well. So there's all of these free tools. I mean, when I first started, I used to have to write away to bookstores in the United States to try and get animation books and things like that because they just weren't available. So I think there's a glut now of doing that, and solo developers like Kerestell have proven that you don't need to have 20 people to do something. So you could actually build a game pretty quickly. So I think if you want to do it, there's no excuse really.
Yeah, and I think that, to kind of add on to that is that I do agree that the most important thing is to just start trying it out. Like, I think that I think we're kind of in the next phase of things, but for a long time, VR was kind of being hyped as the next big thing. And a lot of people were getting into it kind of on that hype wave, not really understanding what is actually special and different about VR. What are its capabilities? What are its limitations? So I would say that, I think the most important thing is to get into it if you want to get into it for, for specific reasons that relate to what it actually is. You know, if you're just trying to catch on to the wave of the next big thing, it's so difficult to not. It's so difficult to create things that other people are going to be able to engage with and appreciate if you don't have that same engagement and appreciation. You know, I think especially in VR, it's so clear to people if you're trying out something that is made by someone who cares about VR and understands it versus somebody who is just kind of contracted to create something. You know, in gaming especially, there's been a wave of like, you know, larger developers being paid money to make games, and then they make something that is making the same mistakes that have been made year after year by new developers who just haven't really made the understanding yet. And people pick up on that very quickly, and I think it can be demoralizing to have people bounce off if you're making those same mistakes that people kind of recognize. So yeah, I would say just on top of all that is, you know, if you're going to get into it, you know, get into it for the right reasons. If you really care about it, and if you really take the time to understand it, then VR is missing those people, and we need more of them. But if it's just kind of something you've heard about, I would say try it out for yourself first, and make sure that it's for you, because you know, it's not going to be something that everybody is passionate about, and it's going to be hard to make something special if you're not passionate either about the technology itself or about the specific kinds of experiences that it enables. People people in VR, I think, generally tend to be enthusiasts who really are into new technology or into VR specifically, and they can be some pretty harsh critics. You know, it's they won't be shy about letting you know what they think. So make sure you're ready for that as well.
Yeah. And one of the things that I've also noticed is that you've got the hardcore, you've got the developers with all of their ideas and their harsh criticisms, but then you've got, you know, especially I've come to understand this in the context of Gorilla Tag more, but then you've got the people who love the games and who become the influencers and who then create their own social worlds. I mean, the numbers of YouTube creators who even go into Gorilla Tag, act out scenes, export those videos, add their music, and then they have guerrilla movies. I mean, the creativity that is spawned. So you've got layers of this. You've got the core developers, you've got the players, you've got your influencers, and then you get the larger community of people. So it's quite fascinating to see how the work that is done by the developers, done well, can really create and inspire other people to be their own, you know, to be creative themselves. In that area, do you address the social dimensions of VR, Joe, with your students? How do you deal with that?
It's still relatively new. I mean, most of the stuff we've been doing has been solo sort of experiences. So this year will be a real discovery of how do we keep people engaged, but also setting those boundaries and getting them to understand what they want to do. I definitely want to try and work with our animation and game school students to understand what their triggers are, but even people like fashion design or hairdressing or other areas where we might find that they've got a place where they can create that and have their own social experiences where they can share their creations and things like that. So there's a lot of opportunity for us this year, and I'm really excited about that. And I think that's the promise of again, the M word, the metaverse, is that we will have these people that are building the foundations of things like Kerestell and others, but we'll also have these adjunct people who are a layer, as you said, on top of them, which may be, guerrilla fashion designers, or like you're going to have these additional roles within these environments and these worlds. And if we can empower those people and give those people the tools to be able to create simply and easily, I think that's where we start to get that creativity coming, from millions of people around the world being out, and people that may not necessarily even thought about 3D environments or anything like that as something that they could do. I mean, there was a little bit of that back in the Second Life days, where you had fashion designers were actually learning how to create stuff, and I think we'll find that that's going to proliferate and accelerate a lot in the next couple of years. So that's really quite exciting.
So as we close out, any last, maybe one gem or one piece of information that you, not information, based on your experience in working with VR, Joe, what is something that you find has been really inspiring and or deeply insightful for you that you would like to share with people?
I think not underestimating the willingness for people to adopt new technology. So, I mean, I kept having naysayers, saying, these teachers are, they're not very technical. They don't want to use this technology. And then I'll put the headset onto somebody who may not necessarily know phones even or how to use computers too much. But especially now, because these tech is becoming so easy to use and so close to the real world, they straight away see the power, and then they're taking it to places where I'm not even thinking about it. So that's what's really quite, for me, insightful and definitely inspirational for me to work with those teachers who are seeing the benefit of this technology, not for the technology's sake, but the fact of how it's going to change lives.
And you, Kerestell?
Yeah, I think, it's not every day that new mediums come around. I think that what is very interesting and exciting about VR is that it is so fundamentally different from everything that kind of came before, that it is a really exciting time to be a part of something where all of the rules are being figured out. Nobody can predict how things is going to go. Nobody understands what are the things that are important yet and what are the things that are not. It's a very it's a real Wild West. There are so many opportunities. The big guys don't necessarily know what's going on. The little guys don't necessarily know what's going on. And I think it's really a space where you can kind of make your mark. It's really a really exciting thing to be a part of. I really think that this is something that is going to be big in the future, and people involved right now are kind of building that foundation. So it's just exciting. It's really cool. I haven't found something that I'm this passionate about ever before in my life, and it's just really cool. Super cool.
Well, I want to thank you both very much for taking this time. We've covered a lot of territory. And I think that a lot of interesting little tidbits have come out, and I hope that people can get a chance to really listen to hear this. And if it's okay with you, find ways, make it available for them to connect with you, at least, I guess, through LinkedIn or wherever with you. But I want to thank you both very much for taking this time and for sharing your inspiration and your experience and your insights. And I wish you both the best, and I hope everything that you plan to come true this year does.
Thanks, Karen.
Thank you very much.
If not everything, then a lot. Okay, thank you so much. And see you again.
Thanks.
Bye.